Okay, so getting back to our like big picture map again, we're still up here. Next Wednesday, actually Thursday, I'm going to do the lecture on international strategy. That'll still be up here, and then actually next week we'll shift down to talking about. Well, we'll have some discussion time too, but the last three topics will be starting next week. Why did we do that? That's interesting. And then the last three topics, we're actually already up to chapters 7 out of 10 that we're covering for the lecture part of this course. So we'll only have, well, no, I take that back. This is 6. 7 will be on Thursday, and then starting next week we'll have 8, 9, and 10. Those will finally be down here in the supporting organizational arrangements part of the Hamburg model. We'll be talking about corporate governance, we'll be talking about corporate responsibility, and then finally we'll be talking about management and implementation. So those are the last three topics, and then we will have covered everything. So getting back to the map here again, first chapter was vision and mission. We talked about that the first day. Then we talked about external, internal. Then we talked about business level strategy and competitive rivalry. Now today we're talking about corporate level strategy. After that, on Thursday we'll talk about international, and then we'll shift over to this blue box here. We'll have a lecture on corporate governance, which is basically the top level, the board of directors, and how to maintain control over the decision making and the strategic direction of the company. We'll have a chapter that's actually not in here. It's my own materials on corporate responsibility. So it fits in here, but it's actually not from the book per se. And then finally, we'll talk about organizational structure and controls. And then we'll basically be kind of freewheeling for the rest of the semester. I have some materials that I want to add on financial analysis, and I'm also going to bring in some tie-ins to the other courses you guys have taken as part of your time and your studies here. So we'll have some lectures kind of tying in stuff that you learned in other parts of undergrad to this class. We'll have a specific lecture on financial analysis because that's part of the case analysis tool. And then we'll start getting into guest lectures. But before you know it, we'll be to Thanksgiving. And you guys will be turning in your draft case analysis documents, and then I'll get back to you with some feedback. We'll work on improving those, and all of a sudden it'll be December and we'll be done with the semester. So that's kind of how things are going to go from here. Questions about any of that? Okay, so corporate level strategy is really talking about, rather than talking about a specific business and the customers for that business, the the competitors for that business. It's talking about what businesses do you want to be in as a company. So you can see here business A, business B, business C, business D. Imagine these as different companies. So this is, if we look at an entertainment company as an example, like Disney or Universal or something, imagine this is a movie business, this is a movie theater business, this is a theme park business, and this is a record label business. So 4 different types of businesses. However, they all have to do with media. So some of the things that you need to do to be good at marketing music are the same things you have to be good at to market movies. So there's some shared core competencies where it makes sense for the companies to be all under the same organization. So what we're looking at in corporate level strategy is, do you want to have a certain type of business within your organization, or do you want to have that as an outside vendor, as a supplier, basically? So all kinds of places within the value chain of a company that you could look at corporate strategy. Back office infrastructure, certainly like we talked about with the core competencies of marketing entertainment products. You have some common human resources across companies where you need the same types of people for both. Technology development, sometimes the same computer technology, the same graphic design and so forth technology that you need to develop materials for the music business is also the same kind of recording equipment or video equipment that you need for the movie business. Sometimes common purchasing, so all of those companies need desks and tables and computers and stuff, regardless of whether it's a theme park or a record label or a movie company or a TV company. So if you centralize them all, then you can make one big purchase and get a lower price on your tables and desks and computers and stuff. And then finally, in the primary activities, the inbound and outbound logistics, so basically the distribution, and so this would be kind of the movie theater part of that. Operations, the day-to-day operating of the company, marketing and sales, like I talked about, and customer service. All of these things, bless you, potentially are things that more than one company are good at and share in common. So if you bring those companies together in a merger or an acquisition or a joint venture, then the companies it's sort of like 1 + 1 = 3, and you can share common resources. So there's different types of diversification among businesses, related and unrelated. So first of all, you've got the first model is just a single or dominant type of business where you have multiple geographic locations, multiple different markets, customer markets served, but it's basically the same product. And a great example of this is McDonald's. So there's McDonald's in Moscow, there's McDonald's in Kuala Lumpur, there's McDonald's here, there's McDonald's in New York, there's a McDonald's everywhere you want to go in Sao Paulo. Like all of those different countries and geographic locations within the United States could have separate restaurants that are offering fast food, but it makes sense for the branding, it makes sense for the common purchase of food resources for it all to be under one McDonald's umbrella. So that's an example of a single or dominant business corporate strategy. In terms of related businesses, economies of scope instead of economies of scale. So economies of scale means that the more you do something, the lower the more you can spread your fixed costs across all your variable costs. And economies of scope means that if you're good at doing one kind of thing, you're also good at doing another kind of thing. So a great example of this is Procter and Gamble. So Procter and Gamble sells soap. They sell, household cleaning products. They sell toothpaste. They sell any kind of consumer product, and they also produce all those products in cooperation with partners overseas. So even though these are different types of products, they all use the same manufacturing expertise, and they all use the same marketing expertise. So you're taking the same skill set and you're spreading it out across different businesses, all underneath the same corporate umbrella. And then finally, unrelated businesses. A lot of times it doesn't work very well to do unrelated business diversification, but sometimes it works. And General Electric is a perfect example. General Electric owns television stations. They produce consumer electronics. They build aircraft engines. Completely different businesses, but it's almost like a stock investment company or a holding company. General Electric. General Electric chooses good businesses, not necessarily because they share the same resources, but because they want to own them all under one corporate umbrella for investment purposes. So it's usually dicey to do unrelated diversification, but every once in a while it works, and GE is a great example. So some of the things that you do share there are you have similar corporate offices, similar back office infrastructure that you can still share, but the competencies in your HR, the technology that you need and so forth does not synergize across the different businesses. So there's three different kinds of things that can happen when you're diversifying or going into different lines of business as a corporate strategy. One is value creating diversification. So this is economies of scope, like we talked about, where you have a competency at doing marketing well, and you could market other products well too. Market power means that you're basically, if we stick with the entertainment example, you're capturing more different types of movies, more different movie production houses, so that the total number of movies that you're offering to the consumer public is a larger share of the total market. And then financial economies in unrelated diversification is like we talked about with sharing back office functions, sharing corporate headquarters functions. So if you have all of the different businesses of GE as separate companies, each of them has their own HR department, each of them has their own legal department, each of them has their own accounting department. If you have them all together, you only need one accounting department. So the costs of that back office function, that fixed cost, is lower. Value neutral diversification are things like one entertainment company buying another entertainment company, so there's less competition in the total market. So that doesn't destroy value, but it also doesn't really create any new value. Some other examples: making moves because of tax benefits. Making moves to reduce risk for the company by having diverse business lines, sharing tangible or intangible resources. Not bad, not necessarily good. And then there's sometimes when diversifying your company, going into other lines of business, actually destroys value. And two of those situations are: one, diversifying the employment risk for management. So if you have managers responsible for very, very different lines of business, they're not competent at doing it, the risk that they fail at their job is higher because they're managing businesses they don't understand. And then if you have one central grand poobah, as it were, who's responsible for a lot of the different lines of business, sometimes the compensation for your executives goes sky high, and you're actually having more costs rather than less by doing that. So different things that can happen. This is a great, it's not very often that we can use a quote from a book from 1937 and it's still relevant today. But Ronald Coase, Nobel Prize winner, one of the founding fathers of a line of thought called transaction cost economics, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, had an observation about the nature of companies that still holds true today, and it's very relevant for talking about corporate level strategy. Outside the firm, you have a market structure. You have price movements that direct how much of a certain product is produced, how much is supplied by supplier X to buyer Y, and it's coordinated through a series of exchanges in the marketplace. Within a company, all of those transactions, buying, selling, between customers, is eliminated, and it's replaced by one central organizational structure. So it's a way of thinking about what a company is. A company is just a different way of organizing transactions. So if Disney owns both the movie theaters and the movie production stuff, then basically the movie production people tell the movie theater people, hey, here's the movie. Our common boss said that you should play it. If the movie theater company is a separate company, then that company decides, well, do we like this movie? Do we think we're going to be able to sell a lot of tickets? And you make decisions based on whether you think it's going to be profitable for you to make that purchase or not. So, but they both organize the same transaction, which is getting a movie from being produced to being shown to consumers. And there's two different ways of doing it. So, the entire question that we're asking in corporate level strategy is it better to organize things within a company, within an organization, or is it better and more efficient? Does it create more value to have it organized by the marketplace? So transaction cost theory basically talks about all of these different transactions: searching for a price, searching for a product or a service that you're looking for, negotiating a price, signing a contract, monitoring that contract, enforcing the contract. It's all, there's a lot of transactions that go on in a marketplace, and you can replace all those by an organizational structure if you do things inside the company. However, sometimes all of those different transactions and the price end up being more efficient, creating more value. So the question is, in your decision process, do you disaggregate? What exactly are you determining for the transactions versus inside the firm? What are your competencies? How frequently is something happening? Does it make sense to actually bring it inside the firm? And then you make a decision: do you make it versus buy it? Or in other terms, do you do things inside the company versus do you do things in the marketplace? There's two different ways of the two different directions, I should say, that diversification or corporate level strategy can go. They can go vertically, and they can go horizontally. Horizontally, they can also go backwards, and they can go forwards. So, actually, at least they can go backwards and forward in vertical integration. So, this is an example of the meat industry. So, theoretically, you've got farms or ranches that raise cattle. They then send them to a different company that owns a slaughterhouse, and it, sadly kills the cows. And then you send the dead cows basically to a company that has railroad cars, and they ship those cows, what's left of them. They ship the meat to warehouses with coolers. There's a company that has a warehouse with a cooler that then keeps the meat until sending it to wherever it's going to be made into meat products. Then another company takes the meat from the warehouse and starts chopping it up and making it into different types of products, then delivery wagons is a little old-fashioned. It basically goes on in big 18-wheel trucks and takes it to wherever Kroger or Vons or Albertsons or whatever to sell it. If Vons, for example, you notice Vons has a bunch of trucks that say Vons on the side. So Vons actually backward integrated into delivery. So they're not contracting a separate company to deliver the meat to Vons. They're having the meat delivered by the department of Vons called Delivery Department. And if you go back further, if Vons were to actually purchase a meat packing plant, so they actually are producing their own, usually, there's, meat is probably a bad example, but there's other products at Vons that are, Vons brand versus, Crest or Colgate toothpaste. There's also just Vons toothpaste. It looks as if Vons makes that, but it's actually not the case. They contract with the same people that make Crest and Colgate to just make another package that says Vons on it. Usually it's the exact same, often it's the exact same ingredients. It just says Vons and they sell it for cheaper. But it's actually the same material that's in Colgate or Crest. They just put a different label on it. But that's actually not made by Vons, even though it's contracted to have the Vons label on it. So that would be an example of backward integration. Forward integration, if the cattle ranch actually builds a slaughterhouse, a lot of cattle ranches slaughter their own cattle. If they build a slaughterhouse, then they are forward integrating into both the growing as well as the processing of the meat. So those are examples of forward versus backward integration, and all of this is an example of vertical integration by basically going backwards or forwards with the various parts of the value chain of suppliers and buyers in an industry. Horizontal integration, an example of that is in the oil business, where you've got a company like Chevron or ExxonMobil that purchases a refinery in California, and then they purchase a refinery in Texas. They purchase an oil field or a refinery in Alaska. Originally, each of these refineries, each of these pieces of land where the oil rights actually lie, were owned by separate owners. But each of these separate owners gets bought out by Chevron or by Exxon, and they're all organized under one massive Chevron label. So they're all the same business, being an oil refinery, but they're cobbled together by one corporate umbrella. So that's an example of horizontal integration. Questions so far before I keep going? Okay. So, reasons why you would want to do vertical integration. You can go backward, like I talked about, into industries that produce the inputs for your company, or you can go forward into basically the people that buy your product. If people aren't buying your product the way you want them to, well, you could just buy them and have them buy your product the way you want them to. Some justifications for this: it helps to build barriers to entry. The more parts of the value chain that you control, the harder it is for a new company to come in that doesn't control those same parts of the value chain and compete with you. It helps if there's common assets involved, so common infrastructure between the companies. You can spread that investment across different assets. It also helps to protect product quality, sometimes helps to improve scheduling. Some examples of vertical integration are Merck. You guys know the name Merck? It's a drug company. So Merck actually sells the drugs and distributes them to pharmacies and doctors. They also have the production facilities to make the drugs. And for that matter, they have the R&D facilities to research and create new drugs that then go to the manufacturing facility and get produced, and then they get put on trucks and shipped to the various pharmacies, and all of that is controlled by Merck. Apple actually backward integrates into production of certain components of their systems, and then they forward integrate into having Apple stores. So having an Apple store that all of you guys are familiar with from the mall or whatever, that's a retail business. That has nothing to do with making computers and making iPhones. But Apple forward integrates into actually selling as well, because they feel like they can do a better job of positioning and presenting their product in a retail environment than other people can. IBM as well. IBM goes forward a long ways into actually doing consulting to manage the company that's using IBM hardware and software. So, like, they go all the way forward into not just selling the product, not just making the product, but then managing the projects of the company that's using their products. So examples of vertical integration. Examples of horizontal integration and why you would want to do it. I'm going to leave Pfizer out of this a little bit and talk about the example of American Airlines down there at the bottom to begin with. Both American Airlines and U.S. Airlines and U.S. Air used to be separate companies. So you've got one company, U.S. Air, that's offering all of their flights around the world, and another company, American, that's offering all of their flights around the world. If you combine them into one company, American U.S. Air, you have a much bigger chunk of the marketplace. You have more competitive leverage against your other competitors like United or Southwest or Delta. The more flights you can offer that are spread over common headquarters resources, the lower the percentage of your cost is for the headquarters resources. So all of that contributes to making it advantageous to horizontally integrate. So it allows you to achieve economies of size or scale. It actually sometimes helps to increase product differentiation. So, you know, there's slight differences in the way U.S. Air, organizes the inside of their airplanes, the way that they do service on their flights, the kind of food that they use. If American and U.S. Air are one company, then within the company there's more options for the types of food available, the types of service, the way that the different types of planes are laid out with the seats and so forth. So it gives you more product variety as well. So some of the reasons why you would want to horizontally integrate. In general, like I talked about in the beginning of the lecture, there's usually a hyperbolic curve in what is the optimum level of diversification for a company. And just being in one dominant business is usually not as profitable, not as competitive as being in related businesses, sort of like Procter & Gamble sells all kinds of consumer products, not just toothpaste. But usually a company like General Electric that has everything from manufacturing appliances to building aircraft engines to owning television stations, usually that actually destroys value because there's not enough common competence to be able to be competent at running all these different diverse types of businesses. So usually the ideal level of diversification is to be diversified into related businesses that all use the same competency, but might be different products in different markets. You know, that actually looks better up there than it does on my screen here. We stretched this out a little bit to make it fit here. This is not my material or the book's material or my colleague David Olson's material, but David was the one that had been featuring it in his class, and I really liked the fact that he did, so I've included it here now as an expansion to what I teach. Anybody, who in here knows what BCG stands for? BCG? It stands for Boston Consulting Group. It's a consulting firm. And Boston Consulting Group has they have a system of categorizing different types of businesses into whether they're stars, cash cows, question marks, or dogs. And basically, it has to do with how much is the market that they're in growing, and how much of the market do they have. So if you have a low amount of the market and the market is not growing, that means you basically have a business that sucks. You're not making very much money, and you don't have any like leverage and power. So they classify that as a dog. If you have a big chunk of the market, but the market's not growing very much, that's called a cash cow. So basically, it's generating a lot of money for you. You've got dominance over the market, but that cow is going to die sometime. It's going to have a limited lifetime. So you milk all the money that you can out of it, and then eventually it's going to die because the market's not growing. If you've got a low part of the market, but the market's growing really dynamically, then if you grow, if you like expand, if you do either vertical or horizontal integration, you might get a larger part of the market, and it might be really great. Or the market might slow down, you're still small, and you fall down from being a question mark to a dog. So if you're in this sector, small amount of the market, but an exciting, rapidly growing market, you can either move this way eventually or move this way. And if you move this way, it's good. Being a star is what you want. Having a big chunk of a fast-growing market. So Google, Facebook, companies like that are stars. You know, they have a huge dominance in a market that's just, we don't even know like how much our use of search engines or our use of social media as a society is going to continue to grow. It has no upper limit yet. At some point, it'll stop growing and our society will evolve even more, but right now it has huge upside, and Google or Facebook owns a giant chunk of those markets. So could go that way and be good, could go this way and be bad. And this is not in your textbook, but it's a really useful way of categorizing companies and business lines. So another slightly more complex way of looking at this, instead of the 4 quadrants, is 1, the amount of sales on one axis and time on the other. So normally, infant companies are, brand new businesses that entrepreneurs start. They don't have very much sales, they're really small, but it's the beginning of the company. So as time goes on, if your sales go up, then you become a star as the market grows and time goes on and your company gets better. If you continue to stay in the market and the market is exciting but you don't have a high share of it, it's a different type of company that the Boston Consulting people refer to as a problem child. So kind of the same thing as a question mark. This is where the question marks fall. So as the market grows, you still haven't increased your sales. So you have the opportunity to be in an exciting market, but instead of Facebook, you're like Yearbook. Nobody uses Yearbook. It doesn't exist. I just made it up. But Facebook is the one everybody knows. But there's other competing social media platforms that are not as dominant as Facebook. So since social media is still growing, if you can find a way to grow your company and have a part of the market, then eventually you become a cash cow as the market matures. If you can't, and you still stay as Yearbook instead of Facebook, and then 50 years from now, social media is kind of mature and it's not such a new growing market anymore, then you're a dog. And eventually, there's two other categories in the very long term. War horses, which continue to produce profit and value even when the market is not just stagnating but declining. I worked. A great example of this is when I worked for Bertelsmann. I worked for basically the German equivalent of Columbia House Records. And we made compilation CDs. We sold them through mail order to people that were part of a club. Everybody, it's almost before your time, but how many people in here have heard of Columbia House? You sign up for the club, promise to buy 4 things a year, and you get 10 CDs for free, or whatever. Huh? I know, it's annoying, but 50 years ago, it was a good deal. 50 years ago, when you couldn't just download things really easily, you get cheaper prices and you get to have cool music and cool books, and everybody liked it. But it's not. It's just not cool. It used to be.
It was so cool because you had all these CDs, but then there was.
But then it gets annoying. Yeah. No, I know. And this is the problem with that business model. And basically, companies like Amazon offer cheaper prices than the clubs anyway, so there's no real value to it anymore. So Bertelsmann continued to keep their club open, but the average age of the members of the club was 50, and then 60, and then 70, and they're basically changing from selling music to selling they're changing from selling music to selling like books on planning your estate, or selling walkers and wheelchairs, because the group is just getting older and older, and eventually it dies off. But they continued making money from that business for years, and they just closed it last year. And 10 years ago, that ceased to be an appealing business, but they kept milking money out of it as the customer base got older and older. And then finally, if you somehow stick around, I think in some ways on a faster timetable, I had my music licensing and event booking business, Avenue 2, for 5 years. And by the time I finally left that business, I would call it a dodo. Like, I never got big, and I stuck around in a market which no longer was appealing, CD licensing, past the time when it was a declining market, and I still had a small market share. That's just dumb. Yeah, I was really determined to prove that I could do it, but honestly, if I had stepped back from my own passion and just thought about whether this is a good idea or not, I should have got out of the business sooner. But there are businesses that will stick around for a long, long time with a small market share, all the way to the point where the market declines. And that would be classified as a dodo. So, ways that you could enter a new business. If you decide that it's a good idea to do a certain activity within your company rather than having it outside the company in the marketplace, there's 3 ways that you can go about doing that. Acquisition, a joint venture where you're not actually buying a company, but you're partnering with another company, or you can just build it yourself from the ground up. So you're not buying another company, you're just investing money to build your own new department or division of the company. So, mergers, acquisitions, takeovers, restructuring. The differences between a merger, an acquisition, a takeover, and a restructuring. Merger, basically two firms go in together and basically agree to become one company, but one is not more dominant than the other. An acquisition is where one company buys another. So a lot of times mergers, it's called mergers and acquisitions because it's very rare that a true merger happens. When I worked for Price Waterhouse, we merged with Coopers and Lybrand, but the new company was called Price Waterhouse Coopers, not Price Waterhouse Coopers and Lybrand. Poor Mr. Lybrand's family didn't get their name on the company anymore because really it was an acquisition, Price Waterhouse acquiring Coopers and Lybrand, but it was called a merger. It's very rare that you actually have a true merger between equals. It's usually an acquisition. One somewhat different example of that was the merger between BMG and Sony in the music business. In general, Sony was stronger in a lot of markets, and I worked for them at the time that this all happened. Well, I left shortly before the merger, but Sony was stronger in a lot of markets, but in Germany, BMG stands for Bertelsmann Musikgruppe. It's a German company to begin with, so within Germany, the Bertelsmann people took over the Sony people. In all the other countries in the world, the Sony people took over the Bertelsmann people. But that was somewhat more of an equal merger. A takeover as opposed to an acquisition. You guys all know the movie Wall Street? Yeah. Well, no. The original. Well, it's all kind of similar stuff, but
Not the original. I know
the original. There's original and there's a remake of the movie that came out not too long ago. But basically, the 1980s in particular were full of examples of hostile takeovers. So a takeover of a company is, public companies have stock, So basically, even though the company is independent, all of you own stock in the company. So if I want to buy the company and the managers or presidents of the company don't want to sell the company, if I go to you and say, hey, look, your shares are worth $20 a share, I'll give you 30 if you sell them to me. If I can buy 50% of the shares, I took over the company without the company wanting to be taken over. So an acquisition is where one company, the presidents, the management of the company want to be bought by another company. A takeover is where a company goes directly to the stockholders, offers a premium on the stock, and then acquires the company even though the management of that company did not want to be acquired. And then restructuring basically is a lot of times selling off. It's the opposite direction. So rather than buying a company, you're taking, a good example of this is, I can't remember the name of the company, but basically General Motors used to have an entire division of the company that made auto parts. They didn't manufacture cars, they just manufactured the parts. And at a certain point, they decided that wasn't profitable to have it as part of GM anymore, so they took it and they sold it to another company. And now, I think it's called AC Delco. But it used to be part of GM, and they sold it out. So that's an example of restructuring. The general history of mergers and acquisitions, in the late 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, it was basically a lot of horizontal integration. That's the era of U.S. Steel and Standard Oil, and basically one company becoming a monopoly by buying every other oil company or every other steel company. And at a certain point, the government got involved and said, you know, if you own more than 60% or 70% or whatever of the market, it's not healthy. Because basically, if you have 100% of the market, you can just say, hey, everybody in here, if this is the only university in the entire world, then I can say, hey, your tuition is not, how much do you guys pay for per quarter credit hour right now?
34.
34? Yeah, so if I said instead of 34, it's going to be 3,400. You know, it's going to be 34,000, and you can either pay it or you can not get a degree because this is the only university in the whole world. That was the problem eventually with horizontal integration, is that one company controls so much of the market that they raise the prices and it's unhealthy for the marketplace. So that was the early history of mergers and acquisitions. Then in the first half of the 20th century really was all about vertical integration and companies like Ford or GM acquiring the parts manufacturers and so forth. The second half of the 20th century was a lot about unrelated diversification. Companies like General Electric that I talked about, purchasing any business that they possibly could to own as many different types of businesses as possible. And then finally, the last part of the 20th century up until today has been a lot more about related diversification. So companies like Disney and Universal expanding into all kinds of different media activities because they're all related to each other. That's kind of been the way things have gone for the last 100+ years in mergers and acquisitions. And that is actually the last slide in my presentation. So before, I usually had a last slide that said discussion, but I just left it off because we can discuss whether there's a slide there or not. Any questions about all of this? Okay, let me pull up one last thing. Let me show you what I wanted you to do in the case template with this stuff, and then we'll call it a day. Yes?
What was like the test average?
The test average, good question. The test average was like 85, I think. The high score was 96. So I actually added 4 points to everybody's score. I curved it up 4 points. So the high score is now 100, but actually the highest score was 96 originally. So I added 4 points to everybody, and that makes the average, I believe, about 84 or 85. Okay, so case analysis template. Okay, so first part, like we said, we'll talk about that last. That's the summary of everything. Vision, mission, objectives, we talked about in the first class session. Handbook strategy, we talked about. Business model, we talked about. Corporate level strategy. This is today's material that we went through. So I want you, for your company that you're analyzing in your case analysis, to look at three different types of business. Tell me about the dominant business they're in, tell me about related businesses that they're in, and tell me about an unrelated business, either that they own or that they don't own, that they could own. And so you're going to fill in, and if we stick with, actually let's use one of your guys' examples. I forget, Group I, what company are you focusing on? Amazon. Okay, so Amazon, dominant business. What's their dominant business?
Online selling.
Yeah. So here, we're just going to put online sales through Amazon portal. There is no vertical or horizontal integration. I want you to tell me, is that business an infant, a star, a question mark, cash cow? What do you think it is? I think it is too. I think it's a star right now. And then, how did they get into that business to begin with?
They sold goods.
Huh?
They were selling goods.
Yes, but they didn't buy an existing company. I think they built Amazon from scratch. So it's going to be internal new venture. Okay. And then I want you to do some research on the other businesses Amazon's in. So there's Amazon Prime now, for example. Okay.
1 hour.
You know, so Amazon Prime is basically a movie. I mean, Amazon Prime is basically like an entertainment distribution service in some ways. It's also it's a distribution service for other products. So here you're going to put Amazon Prime as the division name. Is that vertical or horizontal integration, do you think?
Horizontal.
No, horizontal means that you're buying another web portal. Vertical means that instead of sending products to a distributor, you're going to distribute them yourself. So in this case, that's going to be vertical integration. What would you say for the type of business Amazon Prime is?
Still star.
Yeah, I'd say it's still a star as well. And then I don't actually know the answer to this question, but I want you guys to do a little research in ProQuest on Google. Find out whether Amazon bought a distribution company and called it Amazon Prime, or whether they actually made it themselves. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I want you to research it and find out. And then finally, unrelated business. What would be an unrelated business?
Like their competitor or like
Something that does not have anything to do with selling things online.
they have a bookstore.
Huh?
They have a bookstore. Best Buy.
So that actually, Panda Express is probably a good example. Like theoretically, no, it's a good example because Amazon. Actually, let me take that back. It's almost a good example because it's about food. In general, you can't buy food on Amazon right now, but you can in some ways. So what if Amazon purchased like a meat packing plant?
Well, because right now they have that thing where you can buy
Groceries, right? Yeah. So if Amazon, like right now, Amazon doesn't like slaughter cows and package them in packages. They just get the stuff from the warehouse and send it to you. So if Amazon purchased a meat packing plant, that would be an example of unrelated diversification. Okay, so you're going to fill out that third row too. And if you're not sure whether the company originally started by purchasing another company or whether it developed it internally, I want you to do some research and find out what you can online about that. Does that make sense for what I want you to do in the case analysis template? Any questions? Okay, I think that's it. Let me look here. I think the next thing down below is, international. So the next part of the case template we're going to talk about on Thursday. We are done 8 minutes early. Have a nice couple of days. I'll see you guys all on Thursday. Good. How are you? Uh-huh. The writing assignment?
Yeah. And this was on 11, this one.
Yes. I changed it. I moved it back 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Yeah.
So we didn't talk about it.
Actually, hey, everybody, before you leave, I almost forgot. Aziz, good point. Originally, your second writing assignment was going to be due next week. If you look at the syllabus, I changed it. I moved it back 2 weeks. Okay, so no writing assignment due this weekend. We'll talk about it more next week. Okay. Yeah, I got a meeting, but basically I will be.
Okay, so afterwards, oh, you mean you're gonna be a meeting after?
I've got a meeting with some of my colleagues like at 2:30,
Okay,
but I
so-
should be back in my office by 2:45 or 3.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Is that okay?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Okay, so just shortly, vertical means it's a company in the same industry, or is it a company in a different industry?
Vertical basically means that it's either it's the company that you sell things to or the company you buy things from. It's a customer or a supplier. Horizontal means it's exactly the same kind of company. It's a competitor. Makes sense?
Yeah, okay, so.
So easy way, horizontal is competitor, vertical is customer or supplier.
Or supplier, okay.
I can transfer.